The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 19th Day. In sum, Dr. Setonal, it can be considered that when the 13th century came, the Gellams had realized the plans of the White Fraternity, in a 90%. The Benedictine Guillem order, and its derivations, Cluny, the Cistercians, and the Temple, were firmly established in Europe. The College of Constructors of Temples had acquired, with the possession of the tablets of the law, the highest knowledge. The guilds and brotherhoods of Masons, instructed by the Guillem, were elevating hundreds of temples, churches and Gothic cathedrals, in all the important cities of Europe and in certain places that some telluric values were considered. And the populations, from the servants and villainous and even the lords, nobles and kings, lived in an age of religious mores, sustained a culture where God, and the priests of God, intervened active and daily. It means, the populations that now experimented the religious unity, were prepared to receive the economic and political unity of a world government, the synarchy of the chosen people. The economic power of the Order of the Temple, was already consolidated, and the army of the Church, that would assure the political unity as well. As you see, Dr. Setonal, the plans of the White Fraternity, were just to be accomplished, and notwithstanding that they failed. What happened? The plans of the White Fraternity failed fundamentally thanks to two kings, Frederick II Hohenstaufen, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and Philip IV, the Fair, King of France. Both reigned in different countries and in different historic periods, and they didn't meet each other. Frederick II, in Sicily, since 1212, until 1250, and Philip IV, in France, since 1285, until 1314. However, an occult nexus explains and justifies the highly strategic acts deployed by those extraordinary monarchs. Is the opposition of the Hyperborean wisdom. So we have two exoteric causes of the failure of the enemy plans, the mentioned kings, and an esoteric cause, the opposition of the Hyperborean wisdom, from which they are just effects. I will examine then, superficially, the first and I will focus in detail the second. It is convenient to do it in this form to expose the prominent role that the House of Farsis had in those facts. It will be necessary to start, of course, to discover the circumstances that gave place to coronation of Frederick II, and the acts that he utilized to destabilize the power of the papacy. Then I will stop to show the real causes of these facts, this is, the opposition of the Hyperborean wisdom. It will be seen, thus, how the lords of Farsis developed their strategy, and how they were almost exterminated by the Gellams, in the middle of the 13th century. Finally, I will reach to the management of Philip IV, the king who applied the mortal strike to the financial synarchy of the Templars. Thence, Dr. Setonal, all will be given to produce that the history of the House of Farsis, that I am narrating for you enters in its final phase. With the election of the Pope Innocent III, in 1198, the Gellams played one of their last and most important cards. Such pontiff, in fact, enjoys of a peerless prestige amongst the indocile German nobility. The kings were submitted to his free will and his will was imposed without resistance in every ambit. Otherwise, he doesn't worry too much in dissimulate his plans due to he proclaimed openly the validity of the theory of Gregory VII, concerning to the two swords, from which one, the temporal of the emperor, must be submitted to the spiritual of the church. Well, this Pope, who has in his hands all the triumph of the Gellams, is also that tutor and regent of the young prince, Frederick of Sicily, principal inheritor of the Austrian and German Hohenstaufen. Is in that prince where the Gellams, and the White Fraternity, have supported all the weight of their strategy. Frederick, educated as Cistercian monk and Templar knight by the Gellams, of the Norman court of his mother Constance of Sicily, would have to wield with a vigour never seen, since the times of Charlemagne, the temporal sword of the kings, and submitted to the spiritual sword of the church. Then the spiritual sword, which is the cross of Jesus Christ, and the plan of the temple, would be the settlement of the world's throne, a seat for the Messiah, of the Creator God, or his representatives. but is in this moment when Frederick rebelled early against such plan. Frederick II is crowned German king in 1212, with the auspices of Innocent III, and the manifested approval of Philip II, Augustus, King of France. In principle he made what was expected from him, and in 1213, with only 18 years, he promulgated the Golden Bull, in favor of the Church, in which was confirmed the totality of his territorial possessions, inclusive those improperly appropriated after the death of Henry VI. He accepted, also, to renounce, as any other future German king, to the election of bishops and abbots. It is evident then, the initial predisposition of the young king, to comply with the plans of the Gallien Church. However, promptly such attitude began to change, until it became totally hostile to his old protectors. The reasons were two: the positive reaction of his pure blood heritage, thanks to the historical proximity of the Grail, concept that I will explain later, and the influence of certain Hyperborean initiates that the own Frederick II may come to his court of Palermo from further countries of Asia, and whose history I won't be able to stop and relate in this letter. The important was that the emperor started to refuse from the Gallums idea, which was being amply published by the Benedictine order, that the world had to be reigned by a theocratic Messiah, a priest placed by the Creator God above the kings of the earth. Contrarily, affirmed Frederick II, the world was awaiting an imperial Messiah, a king of the pure blood, who would impose his power by the unanimous recognizance of the Lord of the earth, a king that would be the first of the Spirit, and who would found an aristocracy of the pure blood, in which would only have place the brave ones, the noblest, the hardest, those who didn't bow down before the cult of the potencies of the matter. Frederick II, naturally, felt called to occupy that place. The doctrine that Frederick II expressed with great clarity was the synthesis of an idea which has been developing among the members of his lineage since the Emperor Henry I, the Fowler, Picharero in Spanish, something like Burda, in principle. Such idea constituted the intuition that the real power was legitimized only by an aristocracy of the spirit, which was connected to the blood. Then it was evident, and due to this was becoming firmer, that if the king was legitimate, his power could not be affected by the forces of another order, if they were not spirituals. Sovereignty was spiritual and therefore divine. Only to God corresponded to intervene with justice above the will of the king. This concept was essentially opposed to the sustained by the Gallums, in the sense that the Pope represented God above the earth, hence, corresponded to him the subjection of the will of the kings. The Pope Gelasius I, already in 492-496, had declared that existed two independent powers, the spiritual church, and the temporal state, against the dangerous idea that had been developing in the lineage of the Ottomans and Salians. Saint Bernard formalized the Gelasian thesis in the theory of the two swords. According to Saint Bernard, the spiritual and temporal power are analogous to two swords. But, as the spiritual power comes from God, the temporal sword must be submitted to the spiritual sword. Ergo, the representative of God in the earth, the Pope, wielding the spiritual sword, must impose his will above the kings, mere representatives of the temporal state and just keepers of the temporal sword. Even by the endeavor committed by Church to impose the threat, the idea was maturing and starts to produce collisions between the kings more spirituals and the representatives of the potencies of the matter. The investiture controversy, started by the Emperor Henry IV, ancestor of Frederick II, and Gallien Pope Gregory VII, signalizes the culminating phase of the satanic reaction. In the year 1077, the Emperor Henry IV is obeyed to be humiliated before the Pope, in Canossa, to obtain the lifting of his previous excommunication. If he would have not accepted to that supplication, Henry IV would have been despoiled of his imperial investiture, and also of the sovereignty of his hereditary seigneuries, by the simple spiritual will of the Pope. Naturally, an idea that emerges from the blood, and becomes clearer and stronger after every generation, can't be repressed, with penances and humiliations. Will be Frederick I, Barbarossa, the grandfather of Frederick II, who will be opposed with more vigorously to the papal tyranny and will demonstrate that the existence of the aristocracy of the spirit was more than an idea. For then, the idea had taken force and has many devotees disposed to defend it with their lives. They were called Ghibellingers, name derived from the castle of Wainblingham, where was born Frederick I. The reaction of the Church against Frederick I polarized the family of his mother Judith, descendant of Welfs, Duke of Bavaria, staunch follower of the Pope, from where comes the name of Welfs, given to his believers. Thereby, even by the brainwash and clerical indoctrination that was submitted to Frederick II, in the years when he remained under the tutelage of the fierce Innocent III, nothing could avoid that the voice of his pure blood revealed him the truth of the uncultured spirit, that his divine heritage would transform him in the alive expression of the aristocracy of the spirit, in the universal emperor. Before his departure to Palestine in 1227, Frederick II had become into man of stone, in Hyperborean pontiff, and he had remembered the pact of blood of the White Atlanteans. And he decided to fight with all his forces to revert the order of the European society that was based in the unity of the cult, that is, in the cultural pact, in favor of the pact of blood. The solution chosen by Frederick II consisted in to undermine the imperial unity of that time, which monarchies were totally conditioned by the Church, conceding the major possible power to the territorial lords. They would be, of course, the ones who would recognize with their pure blood the real spiritual leader of Occident, who would come to establish the universal empire of the spirit. Otherwise, the Gallien Church, in front of the growing power of the princes, would only see the disintegration of the political unity that was so necessary for their world domination plans. A political unity that had been edified over the base of countless crimes perpetrated through centuries of intrigues and shenanigans, that had been projected in the secret of the Benedictine and Cistercian monasteries, that had been imposed in the credulous and fearful minds of the nobles by means of the threats of the loss of heaven, the excommunication, the terror, and every kind of unworthy sources. That political unity controlled discreetly by the Church, that now disposed of a powerful bank and a military order, would result fatally destabilized by Frederick II. In 1220, when he was still obeying the plan of the Guillaumes, Frederick II conceded to the ecclesiastical princes the right to regulate the commercial traffic in their territories and to decide about its fortification. However, in 1232, he bestowed the same rights to the territorial lords, a part of authorizing them the complete jurisdiction of their countries. In the practice, this meant that issues as the currency, market, the justice, the police, and the fortifications, remained forever subjected to the power of territorial lords, not having the king, neither the pope, any executive power in their respective countries. After the death of Frederick II, in 1250, the Gallien Church would never get another similar chance to comply with the plans of the White Fraternity. In Germany will supervene the interregnum, during which the territorial lords will become more and more powerful and independent. And in France will govern Philip IV, the Fair, who will conclude with the work of Frederick II, proceeding to annihilate the order of the Temple, and to dismantle the infrastructure of the financial synarchy. As second cause of the failure of the Gallien plan, the main cause, the esoteric cause, I have mentioned the opposition of the Hyperborean wisdom. With such denomination I am referring, logically, to the conscious opposition that certain sectors carried out against the secret intrigues of the Guillaumes, and their Cistercian and Templar organizations. These sectors that comprehended the Hyperborean wisdom contributed in a significant manner to determine the Guillaumes' failure. There were many groups, but amongst the main ones I will cite the Bogomils, in Italy, the Cathars, in France, and the Lords of Tharsis, in Spain. The Lords of Tharsis had become strong in Spain, in the Muslim region as in the Christian. In Tours, they conserved their bishopric and the property of the village, where a part of the family remained all the year. In Cordova and Toledo, always lived the clerics that were dedicated to the teaching. And in Catalonia and Aragon, and inclusive in many European countries, dwelt those who were theologians and doctors, and received the invitation of some lords to officiate as councillors or to instruct the royal families. But, wherever they were, the Lords of Tharsis never forgot their destiny, and all their efforts were dedicated to obey those two principles sworn by the men of stone: to preserve the wise sword, and to comply with the familiar mission. Their priority was then, to survive. But to survive as a lineage, what obeyed to maintain themselves permanently informed about the enemy strategy, due to, one of the strategic objectives declared by the enemy demanded, precisely, the extermination of the House of Tharsis. In the 13th century, the Lords of Tharsis had perfectly clear the plans of the wide fraternity, and they knew how closer were the Gelims to fulfill them. To oppose to those plans, without risking the security of the lineage, the Lords of Tharsis comprehended that they needed to work protected by an order of the Church, an order that, naturally, would not be controlled by the Gelims, neither reigned by the Benedictine rule. Of course, such order not existed. The honor to found it, and saved by its, through it, the healthier part of Christianity, would correspond to Saint Dominic,